Appearing in the history of Marvel Comics, commonly associated with Spider-Man and his adventures in New York, Venom was essentially a sentient alien symbiote with an amorphous liquid form that required a host to bond with to ensure its survival. In the distant past, Venom, who was the 998th generation of symbiotes, was born on the planet Clintar. As a member of the Agents of the Cosmos, its first host, an inhabitant of the Nesse world, proved to be evil and used the symbiote to carry out genocide against his home world, twisting it into a predatory and hate-filled being addicted to rage. Despite this violent start, rather than seeking to dominate its subsequent hosts, the Clintar sought only to bond with and protect them. Seeing this superhero trait as an aberration among its own species, the symbiote was eventually imprisoned by its brethren who feared it would contaminate the genes. I'll be covering the symbiote race as a whole in another video, but for the purposes of this explanation, we'll focus solely on Venom.
What the hell are you?
The symbiote's first known human host was actually Deadpool, who came across its prison while on Battleworld, with Deadpool wearing the creature for a few minutes, hoping for a makeover before he realized it was alive and interfacing with his mind. Concerned that his sanity would adversely be affected, Deadpool returned it to its prison moments before the arrival of Spider-Man, whose own suit had been significantly damaged at this time. Releasing the symbiote from its prison, Peter then touched the black mass which began to cover his body, and much to Spider-Man's surprise, the suit could also mimic street clothes and produced a seemingly inexhaustible and stronger supply of webbing. Once back on Earth, Spider-Man wore the symbiote for some time, but grew increasingly unnerved at its autonomy. Taking it to the Fantastic Four for analysis, he then learned that the black suit was not only alive, but was also sentient, desiring to permanently bond with him. Discovering its vulnerability to sound and intense heat, Parker was able to remove it with the assistance of the Fantastic Four, only to have it escape and hide in Peter Parker's closet as a spare red and blue Spidey costume. The symbiote then attempted to bond with Spider-Man once more, who fled to the bell tower. The loud ringing of the bells, coupled with Spider-Man's rejection of it, ultimately weakened the alien and forced it to relinquish its hold over him. I think it's also important to note that even though he'd rejected it, the symbiote used its remaining strength to drag Peter to safety before fleeing through the cracks in the floors. Now, Eddie Brock, a childhood friend of Peter's and a reporter for the Daily Globe, was then fired after Spider-Man debunked his story, exposing the identity of the Sin Eater, humiliating him and ruining his career to the point where he could only find work with cheap gossip magazines. To make matters worse, Brock also found out that he had terminal adrenal cancer, and though his writing had helped him keep busy, he began to lose everything that he valued. After being disowned by his father and divorced by his wife, Eddie then entered the same bell tower from earlier with the hopes of praying for forgiveness. Attracted by his fixation to Spider-Man and his adrenal-producing cancer, the symbiote forcibly began bonding with Eddie, keeping him alive and bestowing him with a unique set of powers and abilities. Unfortunately for Brock, his own hatred for Peter further twisted the symbiote's own feelings towards its former host into a fixation with either reclaiming or killing him. When bonded, Venom spoke using the first-person plural, we, signifying that Brock and the symbiote were two separate entities joined together, although on occasion Eddie also referred to it as my other and I. Together, Venom and Eddie fought Spider-Man numerous times, as well as indulging themselves into a sporadic career of vigilantism. Despite its successful bond with Eddie, the symbiote ultimately viewed him as an inferior host and saw Spider-Man as its soulmate, frequently making efforts to return to him in between its attempts to destroy him. While it initially didn't act independently of its host, the Venom symbiote was a fully sentient being with its own personality, and the transformation of its host into a predator was simply its way of protecting its hosts. One of the reasons it was enamored with Spider-Man was because through its bond with Peter, the Venom symbiote began developing a basic understanding of complex human emotions. But this was essentially cut short with Peter's heartbreaking rejection of it. Without a host, the symbiote also found itself in a weaker state which left it vulnerable, and this was the reason why it both loved and hated him so much. As its corruption worsened, the symbiote became arrogant, scornful, and sadistic, berating its hosts for their shortcomings and openly stating that Brock was a second-rate host compared to Spider-Man. This contempt was also passed on to the hosts that followed Brock, like Angelo, whom it simply left in mid-air after deciding he did not possess enough venom, leaving the poor guy to fall to his death from a great height. The symbiote also became increasingly bloodthirsty, twice abandoning Eddie Brock when he refused to satiate its growing hunger for flesh, with Brock describing its bloodlust and its corrupted state as being like an ocean of darkness trying to drown him with its rage and hunger, reducing his mind to a red ruin at its most intense. Even without a host, the Venom symbiote was capable of freely extending its biomass into tentacles and tendrils, with a fanged mouth and large white spots for eyes. When bonded to a host, it was able to shapeshift and mimic any type of clothing whatsoever, as well as being able to blend in with its surroundings, rendering itself almost invisible. One of its most unique properties was its ability to augment all of its host's physical abilities to superhuman levels that were equal to and sometimes greater than Spider-Man. This was due to the access it had to Parker's genetic code when it was bonded to him, enabling it to mimic his abilities to a certain extent. As mentioned earlier, Eddie Brock was the third human individual to bond with the symbiote, and the symbiote chose to endow him with most of the powers Spider-Man had, although it was able to create some new powers for him and even mutate itself further over time. Superhuman strength. Venom has demonstrated strength ranging from only slightly greater than Spider-Man to being capable of trading blows with high-powered individuals such as the Juggernaut, a trait caused by the several mutations the symbiote experienced when bonded to Brock, giving Venom additional bulk and muscle mass over time. Durability. Venom's body is highly resilient to physical injury, capable of withstanding assault from high-caliber bullets, attacks from superpowered individuals, and was even known to absorb bullets from smaller firearms. This trait also extended to his stamina, enabling him to fight for extended periods of time, whilst also being able to survive in harmful areas like underwater or in toxic gases, where the symbiote would filter breathable air to the host. Regeneration. Additionally, the symbiote was also capable of healing injuries in the host at a remarkable speed, and was able to cure illnesses and injuries that current human medical care was unable to tackle, as was shown with its ability to stave off Brock's cancer. Genetic memory. The symbiote possessed a form of genetic memory and psychic ability, allowing it to obtain information from its hosts, people, and other symbiotes simply by touching them. This parasitic inheritance also enabled them to copy the powers and abilities of other beings by interfacing with their genetic codes, as was shown with its ability to mimic many of Spider-Man's powers. Wall crawling and web production. Having replicated much of Spider-Man's powers, its hosts were able to cling to walls by controlling the flux of interatomic attraction between molecular boundary layers. Venom could also shoot strands of the alien substance in the form of webbing at high pressure. This substance appeared to be composed of tough, flexible fibers of organic polymers which regenerated swiftly after shedding. In saying that, since the webbing itself was comprised of the symbiote, if Venom generated too much of it, he would be left vulnerable as the symbiote was weakened and unable to replenish its lost mass for a short period of time. Spider sense. Much like Spider-Man, Venom also possessed an extrasensory ability. However, this response wasn't as complicated as Spider-Man's inherent senses. In saying that, it was actually a lot more efficient than Spider-Man's spider sense, enabling him to sense danger much faster than Peter Parker. At the same time, although Venom could sense danger faster than Parker, his reflexes were much slower than Spider-Man's. I also thought it was important to note that since Spider-Man was one of its first hosts, Venom and its offspring were able to bypass Spider-Man's spider sense, enabling them to sneak up on him without alerting his senses, which is what made him such a dangerous opponent.